Welcome to Pondering Passages. I'm Curt Austin, and my good friend David Mullins is going to join us shortly. We're going to be talking today about Psalm 18, pondering Psalm 18. It's a long psalm that has so much to say and has so many opportunities for us to think about formative questions about what that looks like in our life and what that may have meant to the Israelites and to King David and to the people who heard it for the first time. So if you would, stick around, join us, and we'll talk about this passage together. We'll see you then. Welcome back to Pondering Passages. My friend Dave Mullins is right here with me. Dave, welcome. Good to see you again.
Good seeing you, man.
And again, I'm Curt Austin, and it's so good that you've joined us today. Today, we're talking about Psalm 18. This is a beast of a psalm. It is really long. It's going to require 8 whole slides.
Really long. It's
well,
what, 50 verses?
It's a lot.
Verses?
Yeah, it's a lot. However, as I've read through it, Dave, I've been fascinated by the themes or the repetition of ideas in each of these sections, and I really liked it because of that. Any insights before we dive into the actual content?
Well, I figure we're going to have to hit it kind of quickly because there is a lot here. But the sections are pretty well, I don't know, they felt really defined to me. The different movements. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Hopefully I captured that on the slides. One of the sections, one of the movements was really big. So the wording's a little smaller than the rest, but let's get into it.
I think it will be helpful that you know, even though the text is small, that it's all together.
Yeah. Yep. So even this gives you a sense. This is probably the longest title of any psalm in the Psalter.
That's true.
Psalm 18, and we're not going to be able to read it all on this show. But if you go to the podcast, we'll take time and we'll read it there in the podcast for you, and then you'll have that. So, but this is a psalm that David sang to the Lord on the day the Lord rescued him from all of his enemies and from Saul.
Yeah, and I think there's a version of this in 2 Samuel 22, somewhere around
is
there.
it? Is it repeated down in there?
Well,
which would make sense. I mean, that's where the story is, right?
First. Yeah, in there first. Even though some of the scholars aren't sure that David actually wrote this, which I find very curious, the fact that it's in 2 Samuel, but you know how scholars are. You know, have to have something to talk about, something to be scholarly about.
You
can't just take the subscript's word for it. You know,
that's right. The
person that was closest to the timeline, but you know.
So we're looking at verses 1 through 6, which I think is kind of our first section, movement, as you called it. I like that. I really like that term.
Yeah, I like movement.
So I love you, Lord. You are my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my Savior. My God is my rock, in whom I find protection. So this is really about God offering protection, right? At least verses 1 through 3.
Yeah. And I love verse 3 where he says, I called on the Lord who is worthy of praise, and he saved me from my enemies. And then he goes through this section of explaining how that was or what that was like, but he does it in very poetic language. The ropes of death, floods of destruction, the grave, death laid a trap in my path.
I mean, other than the fact it's all about death and destruction, it's beautiful.
Well, but that's what enemies, they're wanting to destroy him.
I thought it was really interesting, though. There's this repetition. So in verse 2, the Lord is my rock. To be my God is my rock, right?
Yeah.
Then verse 4, the ropes of death entangle me, the floods of destruction. Then verse 5, The grave wrapped its ropes around me.
Yeah.
And this is true throughout the psalm, where there's this repeated imagery, kind of almost, what is that called when you repeat something like that?
Repetition.
Onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia. So, but he uses this, but he's talking
I'm
about
going to
this
pia.
destruction, onomatopoeia. So he's talking about the
I'm going to
ropes.
pia.
He's going to the ropes, the destruction, the grave. But in my distress. So he goes back to the fact that God is his
That's
rock
a
and his
big but.
salvation.
We want to pay
Um,
attention to those buts in Scripture,
yeah.
because it shows a turning, not just a contrast, but a transition, a turning. This was happening, but boom, and
then
it's huge.
verse 6b, he heard me from his sanctuary, my cry to him reached his ears. That right there kind of sets this delineation between we as mortals and God in the high,
Yeah,
and yet my cry was able to that he was able to hear me.
yeah.
I'm not so far removed from God that he can't hear me.
For the folks listening to this, just take some time and do a search on YouTube for Rich Mullins' song "Hard to Get," because the whole theme of the song is you in heaven, do you hear those of us in earth? You in radiance, do you hear those of us with skin? And so it's really about this question of, God, do you really hear us here on earth? And David's answer would be yes. It's right here. He heard me. Even though he's transcendent, he is also here with me and heard my cry.
What'd you say the name of the song was again, Dave?
It's called Hard to Get.
Hard to Get. Okay.
Yeah, Rich Mullins. I love the song because it's it. Sometimes we wonder, you who in heaven, do you hear those of us here on earth?
Yeah, that's great. Good. All right. Well, we'll try and put a link to that in like Facebook or something,
Ooh, yeah.
so people can see it. So then, moving on, verse 7 through 15, the earth quaked and trembled, the foundation of the mountains shook, they quaked.
Yeah, this is showing what it's like to have God respond in a poetic way. This is like he heard, and this is what happened.
Yeah.
Which is
Smoke
incredible.
It's almost as you're reading this, I mean, at one point he's talking about the lightning, the thunder, the hail, the burning coals. It is reminiscent of almost like a Roman mythology of Zeus, right? I mean, this throwing down the lightning bolts and all of that.
Look at verse 10.
Mounted on a mighty angelic being. That's
flew.
That's reflective of Revelation then, right? You start to get this.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite the imagery all through here. Glowing coals blazed forth from him. Fierce flames leaped from his mouth. I mean, they're in trouble. Those enemies are in trouble, because this is power. This is, and he continues. This section is much longer than the first section.
Yes.
As he's talking about how God, kind of responds. Then at your command, O Lord, verse 15, at the blast of your breath, the bottom of the sea could be seen. So again, you think about the Red Sea, crossing on dry land, and he blows and boom, and the foundations of the earth were laid bare. That finishes up verse 15.
And it's clear that this the psalmist as they're writing this, you have God is bigger than the mountains. God is bigger than the oceans. God is bigger than the sky. God is in control of all of these things, and He's willing to control all of those to come rescue me.
Yeah,
that's powerful.
All right,
so then we move on. This is actually the second part of 16. He reached down from heaven and rescued me. He drew me out of those deep waters. Um,
He rescued me from my powerful enemies, from those who hated me and were too strong for me,
mhm.
but not too strong for God. That was evident in that
Yeah,
last
yeah.
part. Yeah.
And not just rescued me, but then led me to this place of safety, right?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's just gorgeous.
I think of Psalm 23. He leads me beside
Yes.
quiet and still waters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Prepares a place for me. Yeah.
So
Eh,
20, there's some qualifiers. Verse 20, there's starts to be some qualifiers, right? I mean, he
yeah.
rescued me for doing right.
And I probably would have, if used this as a different movement than the other.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
because
you're
it
right.
it it, it talks about God reaching down and rescuing, giving me safety, and then there's this little transition in 18 where he says he's rescued me because he delights in me,
Mhm.
and then he gets very much what we would probably say works righteous. But it's the Old Testament. Jesus hasn't come yet, so that grace isn't seen as clearly. Uh, and basically says the Lord rewarded him for doing right. God delivered him because he was innocent, because he's kept the way of the Lord and
Yeah,
not turned
I'm
from God to
blameless.
follow evil,
Mhm.
which is a little
But it
ironic, isn't it? Coming from King David.
from David. But,
Yeah.
I do think, though, there is, while it's not works righteousness, I do think that there is something that we do see the benefit of trying to be pure. We do see
Yes.
the benefit of trying to be innocent, and making wise choices. I mean, when we make a bunch of bad choices, we really feel the results of that. Even though
Yeah.
God's grace is sufficient for all of our needs, we still pay a price for when we say things, when we do things, when we, or maybe don't do things or don't say things that really would be in line with who God wants us to be. And so here he's saying, "Hey, look, I've tried to align exactly with what you want," which probably my favorite part of the entire psalm, which is next. I
Well,
really like it.
I do want to
Oh gosh.
really bring up that David did have an affair with Bathsheba and had her husband killed.
You know
Uh,
what? That's in the past, Dave. Let's just let it go, all right?
yeah, but I think there's something. I think there, and I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is, but I think there's something here, and the fact that he knows that he did these things, but yet he says what he says here in the psalm. Uh, I mean, I'm not faulting him for that. I think this is his experience, and you're right. That was in the past. He did pray for
Mhm.
forgiveness, and uh, he was a man after God's own heart as well. And I think it comes out in this psalm.
Well, let's live in verse 19 for a while. He led me to a place of safety. He rescued me because he delights in me.
Yeah.
Now, verse 20 to 24, he's kind of justifying that. The reason God
Right.
delights in me is because I'm innocent and I've done what's right. I've never turned to evil. But you could just stay in 19 and without any qualifiers, God
Right.
delights in me.
Yeah.
Um, and if we could live that way, we would change. It would change everything about the
Yeah.
way we feel about ourselves, the way we feel about God, the way we experience the world.
The way we feel about others, because if he delights in me,
Yeah,
he
yeah,
delights in them. Uh,
yeah.
I used to say
Which
that God had lower standards than I did when it came to people. The reality is he just had more grace and compassion. But I'm getting there. I'm getting there.
well, I was just reading something this last week that was talking about the divisive nature of our country and where we're living right now. Is that if we are truly people of Christ, then we will not see somebody on the left or right as our enemy. We'll see them as a child of God who has a
Right.
different view of the world. Now, we may not agree with their view, but we don't treat them like they're children of God. we, when we then ostracize or divide or are hostile, we stop seeing them in the same light that God sees them. We stop seeing them in a Psalm 18 verse 19 viewpoint.
And the Apostle John in his letter, First John, I think he kind of almost makes it a litmus test that, how are those that say they love God and hate their brothers or sisters are
Yeah.
liars.
Yeah.
And one of the ways you can tell if you're growing is if some of those old harboring, feelings and judgments are starting to melt away, because grace and compassion actually takes the place. So.
All right. So this last week I was in a meeting, and I'm in charge. I can blow us up if I want to.
I guess
was in
so.
a meeting.
I thought you were so excited to go to the next screen, and all of a sudden,
I am. But you brought up a really good point. I was in a meeting, and somebody made a comment that I was disappointed by. I wasn't offended. I wasn't angry. It was just like, oh my gosh, I wish we didn't have to deal with this. We didn't have to talk about it. And I was not leading the meeting. Somebody else was leading the meeting. This was a church meeting. Let's set the stage. It wasn't business. It was church. But somebody else was leading the meeting. I was so glad he was. He was able to take that statement, that question the person raised, and lead us in grace, lead us in just peaceful conversation about it. Not necessarily saying everything you said was right, but let's, I see what you're saying, and I understand why you're saying that, and let's talk about this in total. And he did such a great job. What a great example of somebody who was able to take a polarizing statement and bring it back to the fact that it may not reflect everybody in this meeting. And so let's make sure we live in grace, and let's make sure I was so proud of that person leading the meeting, and I was so thankful to be a part of the meeting, because it set a great example for me too, because my first initial reaction was, oh my gosh. And yet I was able to see how God's grace in the midst of that could honor this person's desire and at the same time help us all grow. Yeah. It was beautiful. It was really well done.
And hopefully the person that made that comment to begin with somehow stumbles upon this video and here's, here's a little bit more.
And I'm pretty sure that won't happen. All right. So next slide is this second part of 25. To the faithful, you show yourself faithful. To those with integrity, you show integrity. To the pure, you show yourself pure. To the crooked, you show yourself shrewd. I just love that second part of 25 and 26. I just love that.
And it should give you pause.
It very much does. Yeah,
it really should.
Yeah.
And I'm going to look it up in a different translation, because that word shrewd, I think there are other translations that I like a little bit better than that. Let me find it here. What are we? Psalm 18. Oops. 18. And the New Revised Standard, if I can get there. Oh, that's weird. What was it? Perverse.
To the and what we were doing
with the pure, you show yourself pure, and with the crooked, you show yourself perverse.
Ooh, yucky.
I think that puts a little teeth to it.
Really?
And you don't think so?
Well, I don't think of perverse. I can't think of a redeeming value to somebody who is perverse.
No. That's how they view God.
Yeah, I don't see perverse as some way that...
You don't know people that believe God's perverse? They have these questions that are saying...
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. To those whose ways are crooked, you show yourself perverse, meaning that that's how they're viewing.
Oh, okay,
Is that a
okay. See,
little?
I thought it was like God's gonna deal with you in a perverse way, right? When I'm
Well,
faithful,
I
you're dealing with me in a faithful way. When I'm showing
oh, I
integrity,
see.
you're dealing me with an integrity way. So when you say you're perverse, it's like you're dealing with me in a perverse way. Well, if my perception is if I'm a crooked person, then yeah, I like that. Okay, I
Yeah,
get that.
yeah. Some of the other ways they translate this is twist, in a twisted way, I guess. But it's torturous and twisted. With the twisted,
Mm.
thou dost deal torturously. Uh, so maybe there's a little bit of that this is kind of how God
Oh.
deals with folks. But I do, just dealing with people, I see that our view of God has a lot to do with how we live our lives.
Well, right. I mean, everybody talks about not everybody. Everybody,
Everybody,
Dave.
everybody,
Everybody.
name 12 people.
I can name 12 people. I don't know if they see this way, but you have you have this image of who God is, and some people see him as this long haired, white bearded guy sitting
Yeah,
over here, or somebody that's a abusive father because that's their experience, or
yeah,
distant and aloof because that's what they're. And so I like this because well, I don't like this, but I think it's truth. But to the crooked, you show yourself shrewd, perverse, twisted,
yeah,
because that's my image of you, God, and so that's what I see.
yeah, yeah. And I don't know. I think God deals with us how he deals with us, but maybe that's not what the psalmist was saying. Maybe he's saying, yeah, if you're going to be shrewd, then God's going to be shrewd back. So you better
Hmm.
buck up, bucko,
Well, and then verse 27,
buckle up.
right? You rescue the humble, but you humiliate the
Humiliate,
proud,
proud.
right?
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
pride comes before the fall is the passage, right? Is the verse.
I've heard
Um,
that.
you light a lamp for me. Um, in your strength, you can crush any army, but with my God, I can scale any wall.
Yes, yes.
Ha!
It's you know we still have 20 verses left.
Let's go.
Yeah, we're gonna
Stop
have to
messing
go.
around looking at NLT, NIV. God's ways perfect for those for who is God except the Lord. Tell me about that verse. For verse 31, for who is God except the Lord?
What do you want me to tell you about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, isn't God Lord, Lord God? I mean, why what's the mystery wording here? What's he trying to say?
Well, I think it's the question: who is truly God? Is it the Lord, or is it our culture, or for them was it Baal? Was it all these other pagan gods that people were going after? Even in Exodus, Moses is coming down with the Ten Commandments. They're worshiping this this creation of their own hands, and I think it's probably what he's talking about. Maybe all the foreign entities around him. It's kind of like, well, they're following their own
Mhm.
gods, but who is
Mhm.
God except the Lord? And He's a solid rock.
Verse
Just
33, he makes me as sure-footed as a deer. You've seen me walk, and my ankle twists and I just fall forward.
yeah, you
So
do.
I must not be
It's so
following God
embarrassing.
very closely.
Well, yeah, but you have
And
stood on mountain heights. I've seen that.
I have,
Yeah.
a little shakily, but I have. Anything else about
Yeah.
these verses 30 through 36?
Uh no, I mean it's following the same theme of just
Yeah.
what his experience of God. Uh and then we move on to 37, and what we find there is what he did to the enemies. Pursued them and caught them, did not stop until they were conquered. I struck them down so they could not get up. They fell beneath my feet. Why?
42.
Because of God.
I ground them as fine as dust in the wind.
Dust in the wind. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, don't get us kicked off
Oh,
YouTube
yeah, dust in
by
the
singing
wind.
that
Oh,
copyright infringements.
it probably did. Wow. What am I
And then
thinking?
not
Oh,
only are they
no.
ground like dust in the wind, but I swept them into the gutter like dirt.
I know.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Okay, we have to go back to verse 19 where, where we look at everybody as valuable. Here he's really going after everybody.
Yeah, he is. I mean, his enemies are coming after him, but man, God turned the tables on them. And he credits God. You gave me victory over my accusers.
Yeah.
You appointed me to rule over nations. People I don't even know now serve me. That was an interesting line for me.
I was just, and I suppose this is a tricky one if you go, well, I go up to the VA every day and I do project management, and it's about time that all of those RAs and all of those PIs, they fall under my foot, versus if I'm the king of a nation or king of nations, it's a little bit more powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, I could just see, the king walking around saying, "Who are you? You're serving me, and I don't even know who you are."
I'm going to do that same thing when I go to work on Monday.
Yeah, it reminds me of those articles I read about, I guess, at least one great big church and the people running the media and stuff. The pastor saying, "You're like a media guy, aren't you?" It's like,
yep. You and I visited that church in, where was that?
Flagstaff, yeah.
And the guy came up to us. He was kind of in charge of volunteers that day or whatever, and came up and talked to us, tried to get to know us a little bit. It was like he was actually taking time to get to know, even though he knew we weren't
Right.
going to be hanging around. I mean, we explained why we were there, and that's the contrast to this verse.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right, we're on our last. This is the home stretch.
Yes.
Verse 46 through 50.
Once again,
the Lord
that rock.
lives.
Rock.
Praise to my rock.
Rock. Over and over, the rock. Yeah.
It pays back those who harm me. He subdues the nations under me. But he sings praise. In verse 49, I will sing praises to your name. You give great victories to your king.
Nations. See, there is that connection with who is God except the Lord. So he's going to sing among the nations so that they know that, hey, this God is truly God. And really, Israel is supposed to be a light. And I think in some context, this is part of that, so that the nations will see that the gods that they serve are not truly gods.
Well, and if you take this into the context of the entire story, the entire Old Testament story, when they stopped being a light, then they were dispersed. When they stopped following God the way they were supposed to follow God, then God said, I can't stand beside you anymore.
That happened early on. My feeling is that happened when they chose Saul as a king.
Well, it started there.
God's grace, well, actually probably started before that, but God's grace and his compassion just really he kept giving them chance after chance after chance. And then finally, Jesus comes on the scene, who gives us the ultimate chance and really has transformed even some of this. Oh, you have to go back. There's this very last verse. Yeah, you give great victories to your king. You show unfailing love to your anointed, to David and all his descendants forever.
Which descendants?
David's descendants.
It's a softball pitch. It's a softball pitch.
I think I missed that.
You were getting ready to talk about the coming of Christ, right?
Yes.
Who is, in fact, a descendant of David.
Yes, this is a messianic verse. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, the psalm talks a good game as far as I always follow you. I've never been the path. And he's got Bathsheba in the background. He's killed all these folks. And yet he's saying, and And so in some sense, this whole king thing was very much a disappointment. The whole
Mm,
experiment. David was the highlight, but even at that highlight, we see cracks in that.
yeah.
But this is a verse of hope that one day there will be a descendant who will finally fulfill all of the requirements of the true godly king. And we come to find out that it ended up being God's own son.
Mm,
That it's almost like God said, you know what, these human beings that I love so much, they're never going to get it right. So I'm going to come down and I'm going to do it myself.
yep.
If you want a job done right, that's what you always tell me, Curt. If you want a job done
Send
right, let me do it. That's what Curt
send your
tells me.
son Joshua. He'll get it. He'll do it the correct way. Well,
Yeah.
it is a longer conversation, and we didn't even get close to diving in deep on any of
No,
this.
no,
Kind of hit the
there's a lot of
highlights.
stuff. Yeah.
But it is a beautiful psalm. It's just a little rough.
What's the formative question?
Thank you. Thank you for bringing us back to that. What is the formative question that this psalm guides us toward? And is it different for every person, or do you think there's just one answer?
Well, I mean,
And if
both.
there is only one answer, could you give it to me?
No. I mean, what question does this ask of you? Or is that too
Well, I think
personal?
no. I think going back to verse 19, to be honest, for
That's
me,
what I'm supposed to say.
that's where I walk away
Yeah.
from it, and I say, this is the,
Yeah.
this is the. Let me get to that verse 19. He led me to a place of safety
Oh.
because, in truth, God has done that in my life. I have experienced that in my life, but I still forget that God delights in me.
Yeah. My question would be actually the next screen.
Okay.
Verse 20, 25 and 26, verses 25 and 26. And the question is,
Mm-hmm.
how does my path impact my view of God?
Mm.
Or
Yeah,
how do I want, or what side of the equation do I want to be on this? So,
I like that, Dave. Isn't that, and I love the fact that we see it. We each take away, and there's 50 verses to choose from. You could,
yeah.
maybe rescued me from the water. I mean, you could spend, you could find something and say
What
that's
water I need to rescue from?
yes,
What
yes.
are the enemies? What are my enemies? They might not be physical. They might be emotional. They might be mental. Maybe
Yep.
there's something in the past that I can't let go of, and it's kind of like an enemy that's really messing up my future. Maybe it's a fear of the future that something's going to happen, and it's really impacting my life today, and I need to be rescued from that. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
That's good. That's so good. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today, talking about this passage. And I would love, if you would put in the chat below, what is it that's the formative question for you after going through this?
Yeah.
What's it like in your life? And in the meantime, you can find us on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and our very own website, ponderingpassages.com, where you can find our videos, our blogs, our podcasts, everything you need to know. And you can follow along with that so you get notification when those get uploaded. And we would love for you to be a part of that conversation. In the meantime, we will be back here next week where we do Psalm 19. We talk about 19, and then we'll hammer that out and see what the formative question is around that. All right. Well, if you have any questions, send us a note. We'd love to hear from you. And otherwise, we'll see you then. Thanks for joining us. One time we were going to toilet paper our teacher's house, and a big group of us.
You
It
were
was
you were such a hoodlum, man.
no,
I
we
did
were
not
all
know
having
this about
fun.
you.
We had all been at Heather. We were at Heather's house, Heather
Locklear?
Henshaw, Heather
Oh.
Henshaw's house, and we decided to get in. So we all got in cars and we drove over to Mr. McEldowney's house, and we think his mom called him, or we think Heather's mom called him and said, "You got a bunch of kids coming over to your house. Todd and Curt and Brant Houston and Heather and Kelly." And there was a big group of us. And we get there, we're sneaking around his front yard, and his front porch light comes on. And we all dive behind, in shade, and we're all hiding there. And McEldowney was just he was the wrestling coach. And he comes stepping out on the front porch, and he puts his hands on his hips. He's just looking out in the dark. He says, "Mr. Austin, I know you're out there, and I'm going to get you." And everybody just starts screaming and running, and they're running in different directions. And Brant was driving his El Camino around, and he didn't have an El Camino. What did he have? He has some kind of great car, and he was driving it around waiting for us to get done, and then he'd pick us up and we'd take off. Well, Todd, my brother, comes running up, and he sees the car, and he comes up and he starts trying to get into the car, but the door's locked. And he's going, "Let me in, you idiot! Let me in!" Well, he grabbed the wrong car. It was this old man and woman driving. And they're going, "Ah! Ah!" And he runs off into the dark again.